I still remember the clink of the wine glass when I set it down. The restaurant was dimly lit, with soft golden bulbs casting little halos over white linen tables. We were seated by the window, a table we'd shared many times before, but this night felt different. The silence between us wasn't companionable anymore. It was surgical. Corbin cleared his throat. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a manila envelope, placed it next to my plate like it was part of the meal. I looked at it. Not at him. Just the envelope. My chest didn't tighten. My eyes didn't well up. I just waited a beat. Then, without saying a word, I reached into my own purse, the leather one Naria gave me last Mother's Day, and pulled out a similar envelope. No rustling, no drama. I laid it gently beside his wine glass. He blinked. Once, twice. I said calmly, "I filed last month." He didn't move, not a twitch. He just stared at it, as if reading the contents through the paper. I picked up my fork and cut into the roasted chicken I'd barely touched. "You thought you were handing me the end, but I started the ending before you got here." His lips parted slightly, like he wanted to say something clever. But nothing came. And for once, I didn't fill the silence. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Let me take you back to how it came to this. See, I wasn't the kind of woman who imagined ending a marriage in a candlelit restaurant. I had spent 38 years with Corbin Miles. We met at a hardware store when I was 24, still living with my parents, fresh out of teacher training. He asked me if I knew the difference between a wood screw and a drywall anchor. I didn't. He smiled like I was the most adorable idiot in aisle 3. He was rough-handed, always smelled faintly of cedar and gasoline. He built our first deck himself, installed our washing machine twice because I said the first angle blocked sunlight. He never yelled, never cheated. Well, not that I knew back then. He just drifted. When people asked what kept us together, I used to say it was the little things, but eventually, it was the little things that went missing. This night, though, this moment at the table, was the first time I felt the scale balance. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I had finally remembered who I was without him. Corbin was still holding the envelope I gave him. He hadn't even opened it. "Yours has a notary stamp," I said, slicing another piece of chicken. "And a court seal. Mine does too. Just a few weeks earlier." He looked at me then. Really looked. Not the passive glance over the dinner table or the quick scan when I walked into the room. His brow furrowed. His mouth tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. I sipped my water. "Because you didn't ask." He looked around the restaurant, probably realizing for the first time that we weren't alone, that we were two aging strangers in a sea of birthday toasts and soft jazz, that the world was still spinning, even as his illusion of control unraveled. He leaned back. I was trying to be respectful. I wanted to do this the right way. I placed my fork down gently. "You wanted control, not respect." He didn't argue. That was the one thing Corbin always avoided. Raised voices, messy emotions. But silence. Silence he could weaponize like no other. I had lived inside his silence for years. At first I thought it was stoicism, then maturity. Eventually I realized it was just absence in disguise. When he stopped asking how my day was, when he started scheduling golf trips on our anniversaries, when he stopped touching my hand at night, even accidentally. This dinner wasn't cruel. It was typical, predictable. And that was the saddest part. But not for me. Not anymore. Corbin finally opened my envelope. His eyes scanned the top page. My name, the official seal, the filing date. He flinched when he saw it was dated weeks ago. "You'd already decided," he muttered. I nodded. "I had already lived the heartbreak. You're just catching up." He closed the envelope, then placed it back on the table. His hand lingered on it, as if he was still waiting for a script that would let him leave with dignity. "I'll have the rest boxed," I said softly. He stood up before the waiter returned. No handshake, no hug, just a stiff nod and a stiff back retreating out the restaurant door. I stayed, finished my dinner, and for the first time in years, I ate slowly. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. That envelope wasn't revenge. It was freedom, sealed in ink and steel-spined silence. And the most poetic part? He thought he ended it, but I was the one who walked out first, without ever leaving the table. People assume that when a marriage ends, there must have been constant screaming, a betrayal so big it crashes through the front door. But sometimes, the end is slower, quieter, like air leaking out of a tire. You don't notice it at first, not until you're stranded somewhere you didn't mean to be. That's what it was like with Corbin and me. We had a quiet life, comfortable, predictable. We lived in a 2-story brick house on Riverwood Lane, the kind with hydrangeas out front and paint slowly peeling from the shutters. I used to teach 3rd grade at the local elementary school just 10 minutes away. Corbin was a contractor, built half the homes in our neighborhood. People used to wave when we took our evening walks. They'd say things like, "You two are what staying together looks like." Back then, I believed them. Every weekday morning, I'd wake up before Corbin, make coffee, toast a slice of sourdough, water the plants on the windowsill. I'd hum little songs, old Motown mostly, while I got dressed. My classroom was my second home. Sticky fingers, loud laughs, glitter stuck to my elbows. The kids adored me. I was patient, loving, the kind of teacher who remembered birthdays and kept extra mittens for kids who forgot theirs. At home, I was the same way. I kept things running, calendars updated, bills paid on time. I called our daughter, Neria, every Sunday after church. And when Corbin would get home in the evenings, dusty boots, sun-tired eyes, I'd have dinner ready. Nothing fancy, just chicken and rice or meatloaf and green beans, the kind of food that said, "You're safe here." We didn't kiss much anymore, but he'd say, "Thanks, babe," and pat my back. I told myself that was love, the steady kind, the real kind. Some nights we'd sit on the couch and watch reruns. He'd fall asleep halfway through, mouth slightly open, remote still in hand. I'd pull the blanket over him, turn off the TV, and go up to bed alone. I told myself it was normal. I didn't miss passion or romance. I missed being noticed. But I didn't know how to say that out loud. Sometimes I'd flip through old photo albums, wedding pictures, vacations in Colorado, the way Corbin used to look at me before he asked me to marry him, eyes wide, hands nervous. There was one photo from Neria's 5th birthday. I was icing a cake, and he was behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. I used to trace the outline of our faces in that picture, wondering when we stopped looking like that. Vivian, my younger sister, visited every few months. She'd divorced her husband 10 years ago. Didn't want to grow old with a man who couldn't find the milk in the fridge, she'd joke. But I knew she left because she wanted to be more than invisible. She'd watch Corbin and me during her visits. Never said much, but I could feel her observations. One night, after Corbin went to bed early, Vivian and I sat on the porch with a pot of peppermint tea. "Elira," she said, "you talk about Corbin like he's a habit, not a husband." I laughed it off. "He's just tired lately. Work's been draining." Vivian took a long sip and set her mug down. "You've been explaining him away for the last 10 years. I didn't answer. Because I couldn't argue with her. I was used to defending my own emptiness. It had become part of the routine. Even Neria started asking questions during our phone calls. "Mom, are you happy? Like, really happy?" she asked once, after I spent 10 minutes telling her about Corbin's blood pressure meds. I told her I was fine, that life gets quieter with age, that love becomes companionship. I said all the right things, even if none of them felt true. The truth is, I clung to the idea of our marriage more than the man himself. I'd spent so many years trying to be the perfect wife, to manage his moods, his needs, his space, that I forgot I had needs of my own. And yet I didn't see it coming. The divorce papers. Not because Corbin was warm, not because we were close, but because I was so used to enduring, I couldn't imagine him taking action. He'd never been cruel, just absent. And absence, when worn long enough, starts to feel like love, if you squint hard enough. I kept a journal, tucked it in my nightstand drawer. I didn't write in it every day, just when the silence inside the house got too loud. I wrote about my garden, about old students who still emailed me, about Neria's baby shower last spring. And sometimes I wrote down questions I didn't say aloud. Questions like, what would I do if I wasn't married to Corbin? Would anyone notice if I disappeared for a day? Do I even like the person I've become? I never answered them. But the fact that I asked them, that was the beginning. To the outside world, we were stable, still attending church together, still exchanging Christmas cards with old friends, still showing up to barbecues, standing side by side. But inside our home, and inside my heart, something had already shifted, and I didn't know it yet. But I had already started preparing for the moment when I'd take my life back. The first red flag didn't scream. It didn't crash into my life or leave me gasping for air. It whispered, a passing moment, so small, so ordinary, that I nearly missed it. But it stayed with me, quietly gnawing, long after the moment was over. It was a Tuesday evening. Corbin had come home late from one of his so-called golf meetups. I'd already finished dinner, meatloaf and baked potatoes. He walked in with the scent of bourbon on his breath and a hint of unfamiliar perfume I couldn't quite place. Something soft, floral, too delicate for the kind of places he usually went. "You hungry?" I asked, scraping my plate in the sink. He loosened his collar and dropped into the recliner like the day had dragged him across hot coals. "Nah, we grabbed a bite at the clubhouse." I remember the way he said "we." No names, no details, just a vague brushstroke. I turned off the stove, slowly. "Oh? Who's we?" He didn't even lift his eyes from the TV. Just the usual guys. But his voice held something new. A hesitation, like a note played slightly off-key. I walked past him to the laundry room. That's when I noticed his phone light up on the end table. Just a brief glow. A name I didn't recognize. Marla. No last name. Just Marla, followed by a single red heart emoji. I stopped. Froze, actually. Now, let me tell you something about being married for nearly 4 decades. You don't need proof. You know when something's wrong. It's not the text, it's the tone. It's the way he didn't lunge to grab the phone, the way he casually flipped it over, screen down like it didn't matter. That's how I knew it did. I didn't ask who she was. Not that night. I folded towels, poured myself a cup of lukewarm tea, smiled thinly when he made a half-hearted joke about the football game. But my mind stayed locked on that name, Marla. 3 days later, he mentioned her, not directly. We were sitting on the porch. He had a cigar. I had a novel I wasn't really reading. He said, "Ran into someone from the old neighborhood the other day, Marla Fisher. Remember her?" I didn't, but I nodded anyway. "She's working in real estate now. Said she might help me list that client's property over on 3rd. I tilted my head, pretending to think. "Funny. Didn't know you were still doing client work." He shrugged. "Helping out here and there. Just favors." There was no mention of phone calls, no mention of hearts next to names. And just like that, he planted the seed. A soft introduction. The "it's not what you think" foundation. I've seen it before. I've heard girlfriends talk about it, watched it play out on too many faces in church pews, women who kept smiling while their guts screamed beneath the surface. But I wasn't ready to admit it, not even to myself, so I let it go. Told myself I was being paranoid. I even brought it up with Vivian over the phone. "There's this woman," I said, stirring soup that didn't need stirring. "Real estate friend. Corbin mentioned her in passing." Vivian's silence on the other end wasn't empty. It was full, loaded. "Did he really mention her?" she finally asked. "Or did you just catch her name glowing on his phone?" I said nothing. Vivian sighed. Alira, you're not stupid. Don't pretend you didn't feel that gut drop. And she was right. I'd been trained, conditioned, to overlook things, to give benefit of the doubt, to believe that gray areas didn't mean betrayal, just boundaries I didn't understand. But that night, after Corbin went to bed, I stood at the bathroom sink, brushing my teeth in silence. He was already snoring softly. I watched my reflection. My hands moved automatically. Toothbrush in, rinse, spit, repeat. But my eyes looked foreign, sad and alert, like a woman watching her house from the outside, seeing smoke before the fire. That's when the thought landed. What if this isn't about her? What if it's about me? What if I've disappeared so completely from this marriage that I've become easy to step around? I sat on the edge of the tub, toothbrush still in hand, robe pulled tight around me, and I just stared, not at Corbin, not at Marla, at the woman I used to be, the one who knew what she wanted, the one who didn't shrink into silence or doubt her instincts. The red flag wasn't the text message. It wasn't the perfume. It was that I almost let myself ignore it. That realization didn't burn. It chilled me. Because once you really know, you can't go back to pretending. I didn't say anything the next morning, just poured his coffee, ironed his shirt, packed his lunch. But inside me, a small ember started to flicker. Not anger, not vengeance, just awakening. The kind that doesn't roar, but glows quietly until it knows the wind is ready. Would you like me to expand Section 4, Emotional Erosion, next with the same deep, immersive detail? After that night with the glowing phone screen and the quiet lie on the porch, something shifted. Not just in Corbin, but in me. It wasn't a dramatic break or a shouting match. It was subtle, steady, like a candle slowly choking on its own wick. The days blurred. He still came home around the same time, still placed his keys in the ceramic dish by the door, still asked what was for dinner. But something about the way he moved through the house changed. It was like I'd become furniture, a soft chair, a humming refrigerator, present, but no longer part of the conversation. He started taking his phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. Once I passed by the cracked door and heard him laughing, a full, belly-deep laugh I hadn't heard in months, years, maybe. I stood outside the door with a basket of laundry in my arms, listening, waiting for the sound of my name. It never came. At dinner, I would ask him questions. How was your client meeting? Did you hear from Neria? Are you still thinking about fixing the back fence? Each time his answers got shorter, more clipped. Fine. No. Eventually. Once I told him I was thinking about repainting the kitchen cabinets. Something bright, something fresh. He didn't even look up from his plate. You're bored. It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. And it landed like a slap made of dust. After that, I stopped bringing up ideas, or feelings, or anything that might ask him to look at me instead of through me. I wasn't lonely because I was alone. I was lonely because I was invisible. Vivian called more often now. She said she could hear something different in my voice. I told her she was imagining things, that marriage gets quieter with age. No, she said flatly. Marriage should deepen, not disappear. But disappear is exactly what I was doing, slowly, almost respectfully. I started keeping track in my journal, not of the things Corbin said, but the things he didn't. He didn't say thank you when I washed his work clothes after a muddy job. He didn't say goodnight when he fell asleep watching TV on the couch. He didn't say bless you when I sneezed 3 times at breakfast. Small things, but when love dies, it doesn't vanish like smoke. It rots, one missed kindness at a time. One Sunday morning, I made pancakes, the way he used to like them, crispy at the edges, warm blueberries in the middle. He walked into the kitchen, smelled the air, and said, "You're trying too hard." Then he sat down and ate them anyway. I stood by the sink, hands wet with dish soap, and stared out the window. That was the moment I realized I had become a duty to him, not a woman, not a wife, a routine. I wish I could say that I packed a bag and walked out that moment, but I didn't. Because that's not how erosion works. Erosion is slow, cruelly slow. It lets you hope even as it wears you down. The hardest part wasn't that Corbin didn't love me anymore. The hardest part was that I couldn't tell whether he ever did, or if I'd just worked so hard for so long to make it look like love. I started sleeping later, eating less. I stopped brushing my hair before bed, stopped wearing earrings. One afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror and tried to remember the last time Corbin looked at me like he saw something beautiful. I couldn't. I tried to remember the last time I looked at myself that way. Still nothing. Even Naria noticed. She FaceTimed me from her kitchen one evening, her toddler babbling in the background. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked suddenly, mid-conversation. "Of course," I smiled, adjusting the camera. "Why?" "You look small." "I don't know, not like you." I laughed too hard. "It's just the lighting." But I knew what she meant. There was a light in me that used to burn steady. And now, it flickered. I didn't have bruises, I didn't have broken bones, but I was walking around with an emotional limp, and the worst part, I had learned to hide it. I had become so good at staying calm, being agreeable, not making a fuss, that even I couldn't hear myself cry anymore. Every time Corbin walked past me without touching me, every time he told a story at a dinner party and forgot to include me, every time he made a plan and said, "Oh, I didn't think you'd want to come," it chipped away at something sacred. Love, at its worst, doesn't leave scars, it leaves silence. And I was drowning in it. But somewhere, under all that numbness, something fragile was beginning to wake up. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even certain, but it was mine. I didn't know it yet, but my silence was about to stop being a prison. It was about to become my shield. It happened at the kind of dinner party where everything is too bright, too many overhead lights, too many polished smiles. We were at the Halversons' place, Corbin's old golf buddies. There were about 8 of us around the table. Aging couples with expensive watches and long-running jokes I never found funny. The wine was flowing. Laughter circled the table like smoke. I sat there, smiling when expected, nodding when appropriate, hands folded in my lap like they didn't belong to me. Corbin was in fine form that night. His laugh bounced across the room, his stories louder than necessary, full of half-truths and nostalgic swagger. He was charming, but not with me. At one point, someone brought up an old trip to Lake Tahoe, a trip we all took years ago. One of the women joked, "Elira was the only one who remembered to bring the sunscreen and bug spray. The rest of us would have fried without her." Corbin smirked, picked up his glass, and said, "Elira's always been good at pretending everything's fine, even when it's not." There was a pause, that uncomfortable kind of silence where everyone isn't sure whether they should laugh or not. But then someone did, and then another. The laughter spread, soft at first, then bolder, as if my dignity had been turned into a punchline. I felt the blood rush to my face. My ears burned. I smiled. That's what you do when you're humiliated in public. You smile, so no one sees the way your heart drops into your stomach. Corbin didn't notice. Or if he did, he didn't care. He took another sip of wine and leaned back in his chair like he'd won something. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. People talking about vacations, stock market shifts, their children's promotions. I sat there like a ghost, my mind miles away. In the car on the way home, Corbin said nothing. Neither did I. The streetlights flicked across the windshield, each one slicing the silence into neat little segments. When we pulled into the driveway, I didn't wait for him to open my door. I stepped out, walked up the path, and into the house. He followed, unbothered, tossing his keys on the table. "You were quiet tonight," he said casually, kicking off his shoes. I turned to face him. "Do you really think it's funny to say I pretend everything's fine?" He blinked, genuinely confused. It was a joke. I stared at him. "At my expense?" He waved it off. "You're too sensitive, Alira. Everyone laughed. It wasn't that deep." And there it was, that familiar dismissal. That knife he always twisted with a shrug and a chuckle. I walked upstairs without another word. That night I sat at my vanity, wiping off my makeup slowly. The skin around my eyes looked thinner. My lips looked tight. I looked like someone who had learned how to keep everything inside. I opened my journal and wrote one line. "He doesn't know who I am anymore." Then I crossed it out and rewrote it. He never really did. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. Made coffee, scrolled through his phone, showed me a meme I didn't care about, and I nodded along as usual. But something inside me had shifted. The humiliation wasn't just about the joke. It was about what it revealed, the way he saw me, the way he invited others to laugh at me, the way I had become a character in his story rather than a partner in our life. For days after, I replayed that moment at the dinner table. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted an apology, but because I needed to remember how it felt. I needed the sting, the heat in my cheeks, the lump in my throat. I needed it to stay fresh, because that pain was doing something important. It was waking me up. I started noticing other moments, tiny humiliations I had brushed off for years. Like when he corrected me in front of Neria about how long we'd been married, off by a year, but said with a smirk. Or the time I told him I was thinking of joining a book club and he said, "You don't even like people that much." Or when he referred to me as the warden during a barbecue when someone asked who managed the bills. Each comment, each chuckle, each careless jab, they weren't isolated. They were bricks in a wall he was building around me, one laugh at a time. But here's the thing he didn't see coming. I was writing all of it down, not in a journal anymore, in my head, etching every moment into the parts of myself that were starting to harden, the parts that were done being soft just to survive. I wasn't angry yet. I wasn't plotting, but I had finally stopped excusing him. And once I saw the pattern, the way he kept me small to make himself feel tall, I couldn't unsee it. The humiliation didn't break me. It introduced me to a version of myself I'd forgotten. The woman who knew what dignity felt like, and who refused to keep letting someone else laugh at her expense. After that dinner party, something inside me stopped working the way it used to. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was detachment, a quiet, clear kind of grief that no longer begged for repair. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't scream. I did something far more dangerous in his world. I withdrew. It started small. I moved into the guest bedroom. I told him it was my back, that the mattress in our room was hurting my spine. He didn't question it. He barely looked up from his phone. The first night in that smaller bed, I stared at the ceiling for hours. The sheets smelled like lavender, a scent I chose. I listened to the hum of the house, the ticking of the hallway clock, the wind brushing against the windows. And I realized I wasn't lonely. Not because he was in the next room, but because I'd been lonely with him for years. In the mornings, I stopped making coffee for two. I made my own and drank it slowly, sitting on the porch, wrapped in a shawl. I'd watch the sun stretch over the hydrangeas and feel the chill of early silence settle on my skin. He noticed once, asked why there wasn't a second cup waiting. I said, "Didn't know you'd be home." He looked confused. "I'm always home this time." I smiled politely and walked back inside. It was a performance at first. This version of me who didn't chase, didn't beg for eye contact, didn't fill his silences with conversation. But then something strange happened. It stopped being a performance. I stopped waiting for him to ask me how my day was. I stopped asking about his. I began reading in bed at night with the door closed. I'd light a candle, play old jazz records on the player Neria gave me. I sat with myself, fully. no longer multitasking my emotions around his moods. One evening, I came back from the store and found Corbin in the kitchen. He looked at me. Really looked. For the first time in weeks. "You were gone for hours." "I took my time," I said, unloading groceries. He gestured toward the calendar. "You forgot it's our church committee meeting night." I shrugged. "I resigned from the committee last week." He blinked. "You didn't tell me. You didn't ask." He watched me quietly for a few seconds. I could see the flicker of something in his face. Discomfort, maybe, or confusion. It was hard to tell. I'd spent so long interpreting his silences, I didn't trust my instincts anymore. That night, I made myself dinner and ate it alone. He made his own later. I heard the microwave beep after midnight, but we didn't speak. Days passed like this, then weeks. We lived under the same roof, but in different worlds. And strangely, mine started feeling more peaceful than his. I began journaling again, not just to survive, but to understand. I wrote things like, "Today I didn't ask for permission to enjoy myself. I took a walk and didn't check my phone once. He doesn't know how much of me he's already lost." One afternoon, Vivian came by with lemon bars. She took one look at me and said, "You're glowing. What are you doing differently?" I laughed. "Sleeping, eating, breathing." She raised her eyebrows. "Without him?" I shrugged. "Especially without him." She leaned against the counter and looked at me carefully. "You're halfway out the door, Elira. I can see it." I shook my head. "I'm not out." "Not physically," she said, "but emotionally, you've already left." I didn't argue, because she was right. I wasn't mourning the marriage anymore. I was mourning who I'd become in it. The woman who walked on eggshells. The woman who kept the house spotless but had no space for herself. The woman who made sure everyone else was fed and didn't notice she was starving. I didn't cry anymore, not because I was numb, but because I was done bleeding for someone who never even noticed I was wounded. One night, Corbin came into the guest room, stood in the doorway like a stranger. "You don't talk to me anymore," he said. I looked up from my book. "Neither do you." He looked like he might say something else, but he didn't. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, then turned and walked away. That moment should have broken my heart, but instead it made something inside me settle, like a puzzle piece finally finding its place. That's when I knew I wasn't being pushed out anymore. I had already started walking away. And the best part? I didn't slam the door. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need to prove anything. I just quietly reclaimed myself, one step at a time. And when the time came, when he finally handed me those divorce papers, thinking he was pulling the rug out from under me, he had no idea I'd already rolled it up, folded it, and walked off the stage. Rock bottom doesn't look the same for everyone. For me, it didn't come with screaming or a suitcase by the door. It looked like a woman standing in the frozen foods aisle, staring at a bag of peas she couldn't remember picking up. I stood there, basket hanging from my arm, coat slightly damp from the drizzle outside. It was Tuesday, or maybe Thursday. I honestly couldn't tell you. The grocery store was nearly empty, quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator units and a toddler fussing somewhere in another aisle. I hadn't brushed my hair that day. I hadn't written a list. I was just wandering the store, pretending to do something productive because sitting at home felt like suffocating inside my own skin. I clutched that bag of peas until my fingers numbed. And then I cried. Not loud, not messy, just quiet tears sliding down my cheeks as I stood between bags of frozen spinach and meatless meatballs. No one saw me. No one asked if I was okay, and that hurt worse than the tears themselves. Because deep down, I wasn't crying about the peas. I was crying for the woman I had become. A woman who used to command a room full of 30 third graders with kindness and humor, who used to host Sunday brunches with homemade jam and a real smile on her face. A woman who used to feel necessary. Now I was invisible, even to myself. That night, I didn't cook dinner. I didn't clean the kitchen. I didn't do laundry or fold towels or check in on Corbin's calendar. I walked straight to our bedroom, the one I hadn't slept in for weeks, and sat on the edge of the bed like a visitor. The sheets were cold, the pillows too firm. I looked at the framed wedding photo on the nightstand and felt nothing, not sadness, not nostalgia, just emptiness. I pulled open the drawer and found the old velvet box that once held my engagement ring. It was empty. I had stopped wearing it months ago when I noticed Corbin stopped noticing. I used to take it off to do dishes, to prune the garden. Then I stopped putting it back on at all. It sat in my jewelry box now, dull and slightly bent at the band, just like us. I held that box in my hands for a long time, not because I missed what it represented, but because I no longer recognized the girl who once gasped when she saw it open in Corbin's hands 39 years ago. Back then, we were young, hungry, full of ideas and plans and possibilities. Now we were roommates, silent ones, living off expired dreams. The next morning, I decided to get out of the house. Just drive somewhere. Anywhere. I ended up parked outside my old school. The building had been renovated since I left. Brighter windows, a modern sign, a fresh coat of paint. But the playground in the back still had the same metal swings I used to push kids on during recess. I sat there in my car, engine running, watching the breeze sway the empty swings back and forth. I remembered little moments. A girl named Risha who used to write stories about dragons. A boy named Luke who cried every Monday but never told anyone why. I remembered how alive I used to feel in that building, how needed. And now, I couldn't even remember the last time someone asked how I was doing and truly wanted the answer. The realization hit like a slow-moving wave. I had poured so much of myself into Corbin's life, our home, our child, that I had left nothing for myself. And now that everything was crumbling, I didn't even know what I wanted anymore. I was 62 years old, sitting in a parked car outside a school I no longer worked at, crying over the ghost of the woman I used to be. That's what rock bottom looked like for me. Not drama, not betrayal, just a soft unraveling, thread by thread, until I couldn't remember who I was before all the giving. I drove home slowly, didn't turn on the radio, didn't call anyone. When I got home, Corbin wasn't there, probably out golfing. The house was too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I made tea, sat by the window, and let myself feel the full weight of my loneliness. And for once, I didn't push it down. I let it sit beside me. I let it hurt. Because you can't begin again until you've allowed yourself to feel the end. And that night, with the hum of the fridge, the silence of the house, the bitter edge of lukewarm tea, I finally felt it. The end. And somewhere, far beneath that pain, a seed of something else stirred. Not hope yet, not healing, but the whisper of possibility. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon, the kind where time drags and everything feels just slightly out of focus. I'd planned to clean the home office, not because it needed cleaning, but because I couldn't sit with myself any longer. Not in that silence, not in that house where I could hear my own heart echo. The office hadn't really been mine in years. Corbin had slowly taken it over. Receipts, contracts, printouts of golf tournament schedules. His chair, once shared, had become sacred. I never sat in it anymore. But that day, I opened the top drawer of the filing cabinet. I was just sorting papers, trying to make sense of the mess. I wasn't snooping. I wasn't searching for anything in particular. But that's how these things always begin. Near the back of the drawer, between a utility bill and some scribbled sketches for a half-finished patio job, I found an envelope. It wasn't sealed, just folded over. No label. Plain white. Something about the way it was tucked away made me pause. I slid it out and opened it. Inside were 3 printed pages, a chain of emails. At the top, her name, Marla Fisher. The same name I'd seen once light up his phone weeks ago. The same name he brushed off as someone from the old neighborhood. Her message was long, personal, peppered with little inside jokes. She'd written, "I can't stop thinking about that weekend. It felt like we were in our own little world. You looked so happy, Corbin. Happier than I've seen you in years. Maybe it's selfish, but I wish we could just stay there, you and me." No pretending. Below that, Corbin's reply, "Being with you feels like breathing again." I forgot what that was like. I didn't feel the ground shift. I didn't cry. I just stood there holding the paper, as if my own life had been printed on the wrong side. The emails were dated just 2 weeks before our anniversary. I sat down slowly in the chair I'd once shared with him. The fake leather creaked beneath me. The sunlight stretched across the desk in long stripes. I read them again and again. He'd taken her somewhere, a weekend away. He told her he felt alive. He told her the things he never told me. And the worst part? It didn't feel like a betrayal filled with fire and guilt. It felt like something planned, software, controlled, a life he was easing into, while still living in mine. I placed the papers on the desk, stared at them. It wasn't that he had lied, though he had repeatedly. It wasn't even the affair itself, though that burned quietly. It was the realization that I had become optional, replaceable. He had written things to her that I used to dream of hearing again, and now he was giving that version of himself, that attentive, thoughtful, alive version, to someone else. While I folded his socks and watered the plants, I didn't call Vivian, I didn't call Neria, I didn't even curse his name. I just sat there, alone with the proof that I was no longer part of the story he wanted to tell. Eventually, I walked upstairs, into our bedroom, opened my own drawer. Inside was a plain leather-bound notebook, my journal. I flipped to a blank page and wrote one sentence in large, sharp letters. He gave her the man I begged him to be. I underlined it 3 times. Then I closed the notebook and stood there, looking at myself in the mirror. My reflection wasn't weeping. It wasn't shaking. It was still, cold, tired. But beneath the stillness, something deep inside me stirred. Something not broken, but buried. I walked back down, picked up the email printouts, and placed them in a folder labeled simply, "Keep." I didn't do anything dramatic with them. I didn't confront him. I didn't rage. Because I wasn't ready for him to know I knew. What I had now wasn't evidence. It was clarity. For so long, I had wondered if it was me, if I'd done something wrong, if I'd grown boring, if my body had aged in a way that pushed him away. But this was freedom in disguise. Because now I knew. It wasn't about me not being enough. It was about him refusing to show up. And maybe, just maybe, he never had. That night, I slept in the guest room again. But this time, I didn't feel like a castaway. I felt like a woman who had found the door. And now, she just needed to decide when to walk through it. After I found those emails, the soft betrayal written in Times New Roman, I didn't fall apart. I waited for the collapse, the screaming inside my head, the breakdown that all the movies say should come after discovering your husband is in love with another woman. But it never came. Instead, something else happened. I woke up the next morning before the sun rose, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of trying to be perfect. I just lay there, in the silence, eyes open, heart steady. And then I smiled, just slightly, because I knew something he didn't. Corbin thought I was asleep in the life he built around me, but I was awake now, and wide-awake women don't stay stuck for long. That was the morning I stopped making him breakfast. He came downstairs looking groggy, rubbing the back of his neck. He glanced at the empty stove, then at me sitting at the table with a bowl of yogurt and berries. "You didn't make coffee?" he asked. I took a bite. "Nope, just made enough for me." He looked confused, not angry, just disoriented, like a man who walked into what used to be his life and found the furniture moved. Later that day, I drove to the library, sat in the back corner and filled out a job application. It wasn't for anything grand, just a part-time position helping with literacy programs. But it was mine. It had nothing to do with him, and it felt like oxygen. When I got back home, I opened the windows wide, let the air move through the house like it was cleansing something I couldn't quite name. I lit a cinnamon candle and put on a Nina Simone record I hadn't touched in over a decade. It played softly through the speakers, and I danced, alone, barefoot, slow. Not because I was happy, because I was alive. Later that week, I found a dusty sewing machine in the attic. I brought it down, cleaned it, and began repairing old tablecloths that had holes no one noticed but me. I stitched slowly, rhythmically, like I was sewing myself back together with each pass of the needle. Vivian called. I didn't tell her everything, not yet. But she must have heard something in my voice because she paused and said, "Elira, I don't know what you've done, but it suits you." That evening, Corbin walked in while I was at the kitchen counter, sketching out ideas for a small herb garden. I'd always wanted one. A raised bed with basil, rosemary, thyme. He looked at the notebook. "What's that?" I didn't look up. Plans. For what? For me. He didn't know how to respond. I think that scared him more than anything I could have shouted. You see, Corbin had grown used to me being predictable. The soft yes, the always there, the quiet background to his life. He didn't know what to do with a woman who didn't ask for his opinion, who didn't try to win him back. That was my awakening. Not a dramatic transformation, not a makeover or a suitcase by the door. It was quiet. I stopped explaining myself, stopped waiting for apologies, stopped trying to interpret his moods like weather patterns. I started reading again, walks by myself in the morning. I cooked meals just for me, things he didn't like. Lentil soup, roasted eggplant, warm ginger tea with honey. I bought myself a pair of earrings, delicate gold ones shaped like leaves. I wore them even if I had nowhere to go. Each small act was a rebellion, not against Corbin, but against the version of myself that had made shrinking look like love. And when he noticed, and he did notice, he began to shift. He started texting me during the day. Need anything from the store? Dinner plans tonight? He was trying in his way, but it was too late. Because when a woman wakes up from emotional invisibility, she doesn't go back to sleep. She doesn't unsee the years of being talked over, looked past, laughed at, and left alone in a shared house. She doesn't return to silence once she's learned to hear her own voice again. The day I got the job offer from the library, I celebrated alone. I bought a small lemon tart from a bakery downtown, lit a candle, wrote in my journal, "Today I chose myself, not in rage, not in revenge, but in return." Return to me. That night, Corbin asked if I wanted to sit with him and watch TV. I said, "No, thank you," and went upstairs with my tart and a book of poetry I hadn't opened since college. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore, and that was the point. I had stopped trying to be recognizable to a man who never bothered to look deeply in the first place. This awakening wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was a woman remembering she was never small. She had just been living in a cage that was built slowly over time by quiet hands, including her own. And now she had the key. Once you awaken, really awaken, there's no going back. But I didn't announce it. I didn't scream, "I'm leaving!" I didn't post cryptic quotes online or cry into the phone with friends. I just started preparing, silently. The kind of silence that's not passive but intentional, the kind that doesn't wait for permission. I started with my finances. I hadn't looked closely at our accounts in years. Corbin handled most of it, or rather, he liked having control of it. I let him. Because back then, it felt like division of labor. Now, it felt like surrender I'd never questioned. I pulled out old bank statements, created a spreadsheet, opened a separate checking account in my name, transferred small amounts at first. Not enough to raise flags, just enough to breathe. Vivian always told me freedom costs something. Make sure you can afford it. She wasn't just talking about money. The next step was paperwork. I visited the county clerk's office one rainy Thursday morning. The woman behind the glass looked at me kindly when I asked for the forms. "Divorce packet?" she said gently. I nodded. My fingers trembled slightly as I took the manila folder, but my voice didn't shake when I said, "Yes." "I just want to read through it." I didn't tell anyone. Not even Vivian, not yet. It wasn't secrecy. It was self-preservation. I needed to know I could move forward without applause or reassurance, that I was choosing myself for myself, not because anyone told me to. At home, I filled out the forms slowly. Name, date of marriage, grounds for divorce. The questions felt cold, clinical, but my answers came with calm certainty. When I reached the section on assets, I didn't flinch. I knew what I had contributed. Even if Corbin hadn't noticed, the law did. And more importantly, I did. I folded the forms neatly, placed them in a drawer, and set a date for filing. 2 weeks later. I didn't rush. I gave myself the dignity of stillness. While Corbin watched sports and texted God knows who, I was building something. Quietly, carefully. I started moving my personal items out of our bedroom. He never asked why. Maybe he didn't care. Maybe he noticed and didn't want to know the answer. I boxed up old photo albums, jewelry, family recipes, handwritten by my mother. Things that mattered to me, things that weren't his to discard. I rented a storage unit, just one of those small ones off Highway 43. I visited once a week, bringing a box each time. To him, I was just running errands. To me, I was relocating my life, piece by piece. One day, while clearing out the hallway closet, I found my old college journal. Inside it, a list I'd written when I was 21, what I want my life to feel like. I read the entries one by one. Light through the kitchen window in the morning. A man who listens when I speak. Peace, even when I'm alone. A garden with mint and tomatoes. Laughter I don't have to earn. I sat on the floor, journal in hand, and cried. Because somewhere along the way, I'd traded those dreams for survival. And I was done surviving. I got a part-time job at the library, told Corbin it was just something to fill the time. He barely acknowledged it. The job gave me more than a paycheck. It gave me autonomy, a schedule of my own. I met people who didn't know me as Corbin's wife. They just knew me as Alira, the woman who remembered their favorite authors and recommended books with warmth and care. I began saving every dollar I made. Called a lawyer Vivian had once used and asked for a quiet consultation. We met in a small office with no windows. She looked at me the way women do when they recognize something in each other. Not pity, but a kind of sisterhood. "You're already halfway there," she said after I told her everything. I nodded. "I'm not afraid of being alone. I'm afraid of disappearing again." She smiled. "You're not going to. Not anymore." The silent setup wasn't just logistics. It was emotional scaffolding. I started imagining life after him. My own apartment, a kitchen I decorated without compromise, a bookshelf I filled without asking if we really needed another novel. I let myself feel excited, not wildly, just a low, steady flicker of light in the dark. Corbin remained oblivious. He still asked what was for dinner, still assumed I'd be there when he got back from the hardware store, still treated my quiet as background noise, never once suspecting it was the sound of me rebuilding myself in real time. That's the thing about men like him. They think silence means surrender. But sometimes, silence is strategy. And I was almost ready. Almost. It started with small things. A question Corbin asked at dinner that I didn't answer. A grocery list I used to write out for both of us. Now I only wrote what I needed. A birthday card he forgot to sign for Neria's son. I mailed it anyway, and when she called to thank us, I didn't correct her when she said, "Thank you, Mom." He was losing his grip, not because I was being cruel, but because I had stopped doing the invisible work he never noticed, until it wasn't being done anymore. That's what shook him. It wasn't the loud stuff. It was the quiet unraveling of his convenience. The first real crack came one Saturday morning. He walked into the kitchen, freshly showered, hair still wet. I was dressed already. Jeans, cardigan, my canvas bag over my shoulder. He glanced at me. "You going somewhere?" "Library," I said, sipping my tea. "For what?" "I work there now, remember?" He frowned slightly. "You didn't say you were going in today." I didn't flinch. "I don't have to." He blinked. I could see it. The moment he realized I wasn't asking permission, that was new. I grabbed my keys, kissed the top of the dog's head, and left without another word. That night, he asked if I wanted to watch one of our old favorite shows. I told him I already had plans, a Zoom call with a friend from my teaching days. He stared at me. "You've been really busy lately." I smiled. "Feels good, doesn't it?" He didn't answer. The power was shifting, and not because I made it a battle. I simply stopped being smaller to make him comfortable. He began to notice, in little flashes of insecurity that slipped through the cracks of his usual indifference. One evening, I wore a navy blue dress I hadn't touched in years, a modest, elegant cut. I wore it to the library's donor event, just 2 hours long but meaningful. Corbin looked up from his recliner when I came down the stairs. "Where are you going in that?" I turned slowly. "Out." "Dressed like that?" "Yes." "Who's going to be there?" "People." He stared at me. "You look nice," he said awkwardly. "Thank you," I replied. "I didn't dress for them or for you. I dressed for myself." That stunned silence afterward, that was power returning home. It wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering I had value without his approval. He started doing little things, unprompted. He folded a load of laundry, washed the car, picked up my favorite cereal from the store. I didn't gush. I didn't reward him with affection, because I knew exactly what it was. Panic. He was trying to make up for something he hadn't yet admitted to. One afternoon, I walked into the home office to grab a notepad. He quickly minimized something on the computer screen. He looked up, startled. "Need something?" I met his eyes. Calm. Still. Just passing through. I didn't ask what he was hiding, because I already knew, and it no longer held power over me. That's what scared him the most. I wasn't angry. I wasn't demanding answers. I was simply done pretending. When I cooked, I made enough for one. When I shopped, I didn't ask what he needed. When he made a snide comment about how quiet I'd become, I responded, "It's peaceful, isn't it?" He didn't laugh. He began watching me, the way someone watches a door slowly closing, not sure if he should run to stop it or pretend he doesn't care. Once I came home and found him sitting at the dining room table, holding an old photo of us from our anniversary in 2002. We were younger, happier maybe, or just trying harder. He looked up. "Do you remember this?" I nodded. "I remember who I used to be then." He looked down again, as if that hurt. He didn't ask who I was now, because deep down, I think he knew. He was living with a woman he could no longer control with silence, a woman who no longer danced around his moods, a woman who didn't flinch when he pulled away, because she had already stepped back. The power shift wasn't a moment. It was a series of small awakenings. It was walking past him without needing to be seen. It was making decisions without fear of his reaction. It was knowing I could stand in my own space and feel whole. He felt it, that quiet, steady return of my center. And for the first time in our marriage, he looked unsure. He was used to being the decider, the one who handed down the verdict. He didn't know what to do with a woman who had already reached her own conclusion and was no longer interested in his. The power had shifted. Not in revenge, not in anger, in clarity. And the best part? He didn't even see it coming. The confrontation didn't happen the way people expect. There were no raised voices, no dramatic gestures, no plates flying across the kitchen. That wasn't me. That was never me. It happened at dinner. A quiet restaurant, dim lighting, polished wood floors, a place we used to go on anniversaries, back when anniversaries meant something. He picked the spot, said he wanted to talk. That alone told me something. Corbin never wanted to talk, not really. Not about feelings, not about truths. So when he made the reservation, I knew this wasn't a conversation. It was a move, a setup, one final act of control. I wore a slate gray blouse and pearl earrings, not to impress him, to feel composed, grounded, unshakable. He was already seated when I arrived, button-down shirt, freshly shaven. He looked expectant, like someone who thought he had the upper hand. We ordered drinks, light chit-chat. He asked about my job at the library. I answered politely. I didn't mention the promotion I'd just been offered to lead a new adult literacy program. When the waiter brought our entrees, he reached into his coat pocket and placed a manila envelope on the table. No fanfare, no build-up. Just placed it between the bread basket and my water glass like it was dessert. "I think it's time," he said. I didn't touch the envelope, just looked at it. "I've spoken with a lawyer," he continued. "She's drawn up the terms. Nothing messy. I just think we've grown apart." His tone was calm, measured, like he was doing me a favor. I let the silence stretch. I could tell he thought I was stunned, maybe hurt, maybe about to cry, but I wasn't. I reached into my purse and took out my own envelope, laid it neatly on the table directly in front of him. He blinked. "I filed last month," I said softly. "You're late." He looked from my envelope to his, back to me. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I sipped my water. "You're not the only one who knows how to prepare in silence," I added. He finally spoke. "You already filed?" I nodded. "I didn't need a dramatic exit, Corbin. I just needed a clean one." His hands trembled slightly as he opened my envelope, read the top page. His name. My name. The seal. The date. "You had this all this time?" "I waited," I said, "because I wanted to leave with dignity, not drama." He leaned back in his chair, staring at me like he didn't recognize the woman across the table. But I knew exactly who I was now. "You're not angry," he said. "No," I replied. "I've already done my grieving. You're just catching up." The waiter came by to check on us. Corbin waved him off. He looked down at the papers again, then up at me. "So that's it?" I tilted my head. "You thought handing me divorce papers would put you in control, that I'd be blindsided, crushed. But I've already walked away from this marriage, Corbin. I've just been polite enough to wait until you noticed." He looked like he wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't owe him rage. I didn't owe him explanation. The truth had already spoken for itself. "I stayed longer than I should have," I said. "I kept shrinking myself to fit a life you didn't even want to share. And somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was. That's not your fault entirely. I let it happen. But I'm done doing that now." He looked down, and for the first time in years, maybe ever, he looked small. Not physically, not in stature, but small in the way that people look when they finally realize the thing they took for granted is already gone. "You're serious," he said quietly. "Yes," I answered. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." The air between us shifted, no longer charged with the usual unspoken rules. This wasn't a power play anymore. It was closure. He reached for his wine glass, hesitated, then set it back down. "You could have told me," he said. I looked him straight in the eye. "You could have noticed." There it was, the truth that had been waiting in the walls of our house for years. I stood up and placed enough cash on the table to cover my portion of the meal. As I picked up my purse, I added one final thing. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. "You didn't leave me, Corbin. I just let you believe you were first." I walked out of that restaurant not with a broken heart, but with a full one. And as I stepped into the cool evening air, I felt it. Not freedom, not yet, but the first real breath I'd taken in years. I thought that dinner would be the end of it. Two people signing papers, walking away quietly from a life they'd built and broken. But the truth is, some endings don't settle neatly. Some endings carry one final twist, not to destroy, but to balance. That balance came a few weeks later, when I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Later, while folding laundry, I pressed play. A woman's voice, calm, but cold. "Hi, this is Adrienne Fisher. I'm Marla's sister. I don't know if this message will make sense to you yet, but I just wanted to give you a heads up. Things are about to get ugly on your husband's end." My chest tightened. I sat down, phone in hand, replaying her name. Adrienne Fisher. Fisher. As in Marla Fisher, the woman from the emails, the one Corbin told me was just an old friend. I returned Adrienne's call. She answered on the first ring. "Elira?" she asked, cautious. "Yes," she took a breath. "I know we don't know each other, but I found your name in my sister's inbox. Corbin, your husband, or ex-husband, I suppose. He's been seeing Marla. For a while." I stayed quiet. She continued. "Well, it blew up last night. Her husband, yes, she's married, found the emails, the gifts, everything." I felt my hands go cold. "He's filing for divorce, and it's going to be messy. Marla called me in tears, saying she never thought it would go this far. I asked her what she thought would happen." Adriana's voice shifted. Less angry now, just tired. "She mentioned you. Said you were distant, polite, and probably clueless. I told her she was wrong." I let that sink in. "She said that?" I asked quietly. "Yes," Adrienne replied. "But I wanted you to know. She and Corbin weren't some grand love story. It was two bored, selfish people trying to feel important again." There it was, the justice. Not in a courtroom, not on paper, but in truth, in the unraveling of a lie they'd built in secret, a lie that now had a cost. I thanked Adrienne. We hung up. Later that night, I received a message from Corbin. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. Instead, I sat on the porch, the same one we used to share coffee on, and watched the wind move through the trees. I held my tea, warm in my hands, and felt peace. The next morning, I got an email from my lawyer. Corbin was attempting to negotiate the settlement, trying to argue for the house, for a bigger share of the retirement fund. I laughed. The same man who handed me divorce papers over dinner, thinking he had won, now scrambling to regain control. But he couldn't, because I'd filed first, because my case was airtight, because the law saw what he refused to, my contributions, my sacrifices, my quiet strength. My lawyer responded on my behalf with two simple words: "We decline." That was the final turn. Corbin didn't just lose the woman he dismissed, he lost his safety net. He lost the false future he tried to build with someone else, someone who was now being divorced by her own husband. And I got the house. I got the pension split as originally filed. I got every single one of my grandmother's antiques without argument. Because Corbin was too embarrassed to fight anymore. But more than any of that, I got something he could never take back. My name, my voice, my peace. People think justice is loud. Courtrooms shouting, verdicts slammed like thunder. But sometimes justice is quiet. Sometimes it's the silence that follows when someone realizes they underestimated the wrong woman. A few days later, I ran into him at the grocery store. He looked older, not in years, in weight. His shoulders sagged. His face had lost the smugness that once lived there like a permanent fixture. He looked at me like a man who remembered something too late. I gave him a polite smile, the kind you give someone you used to know but no longer belong to. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned the corner, pushed my cart forward, and left him in the silence. That was my justice. Not revenge, not punishment, just freedom. And he got to live with the knowledge that I found it, long before he ever handed me that envelope. It had been almost 3 weeks since the divorce was finalized when I heard the knock on the front door. It was mid-morning. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet I had learned to enjoy. I was sitting at the kitchen table, clipping mint leaves from the little herb garden I'd started on the back patio. A ceramic mug of tea steamed gently beside me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone. So when I opened the door and saw Naria standing there, my daughter, holding her toddler on one hip, a duffel bag at her feet, I froze for just a second. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. I looked at her eyes. They were tired, wet at the edges. Not sad, just heavy. "I didn't call. I should have. I just needed to see you." I pulled her into a hug before she could say another word. We didn't speak for a while. Not as we stood in the doorway. Not as she helped her son, Eli, out of his tiny shoes. Not as she unpacked apple juice boxes and diapers and set them on the counter like she'd never left. It wasn't awkward. It was something older, deeper. A stillness between us that had been growing for years. Eventually, we sat on the back patio together, Eli toddling in circles with a toy truck while the wind moved through the rosemary. Naria finally broke the silence. "I should have come sooner," she said. "When you told me things were hard with Dad, I listened, but I didn't really hear you." I didn't respond right away. I let her have that moment. I guess I always thought, you were just strong. You'd be okay. You two had been together forever. And I was busy with the baby and... She stopped herself. "That sounds like an excuse." I reached for her hand. "You were building your own life, baby. That's not a crime." "But you were alone," she said. "And I didn't ask. I didn't really check in. I didn't even know about the divorce until it was done." "I didn't tell anyone until it was done." She blinked at me. "Why?" I looked down at the mint in my hand, rolled a leaf between my fingers. Because I needed to know I could stand on my own. I didn't want to be rescued. I wanted to come back to myself, quietly. Naria nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheek. "I'm proud of you. I just wish I'd been there while you were going through it." I gave her a small, sad smile. "You were there," I said. "Just not the way you think. Every time I watched you raise that little boy with so much love, every time I saw you fight for your own peace, I thought, maybe I deserve that too. Maybe I don't have to finish this life stuck in a story that's over." She covered her mouth with her hand and sobbed quietly. Eli ran up then, offering me a dandelion he'd crushed in his chubby little fist. I took it, held it to my heart. "See this?" I said to him gently. "This is what second chances look like." Naria stayed for the weekend. We cooked together just like we used to. She asked questions about the divorce. Some careful, some blunt. I answered what I could. Not out of bitterness, but from a place of peace. One night after Eli was asleep, we sat in the living room with the lights low, a blanket over our legs. She turned to me. "Did you ever think about going back? To Dad?" I paused. For a long time, I thought staying was loyalty. I thought leaving would make me a failure. She waited. "But no," I said. "Not once I left. I didn't walk out for revenge. I walked out because I finally believed I had the right to be happy." She nodded. "I see that now. And I want to be better at showing up, for you, like you've always done for me." I squeezed her hand. "You're here now. That's enough." It was strange how that moment, a simple conversation between mother and daughter, healed more than therapy ever could. Not because it fixed the past, but because it reminded me that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. Sometimes, the people who matter drift. Life gets busy. Priorities shift. But when they come back, truly come back, you don't hold their absence against them. You let them sit beside you You pass the tea, and you start again. Neria left Sunday evening. Eli gave me a big, sticky kiss on the cheek. As they pulled out of the driveway, she waved from the car window. I stood on the porch, wind in my hair, the sun dipping low behind the trees. There was no pain, no yearning, just peace. Because reconnection isn't about returning to what was. It's about meeting again. Both of you changed. And realizing that this new version of the relationship might just be better, stronger, more honest, more rooted. And for the first time in decades, I didn't need anyone to stay. I simply welcomed them. When they came home, the house is quieter now. Not the kind of silence that stings, the kind that soothes, the kind that feels like an exhale after holding your breath for too many years. Most mornings, I wake up with the sun slipping through the curtains, painting soft gold on the walls of the guest room that became mine. I make 1 cup of coffee. I sit by the kitchen window. I watch the breeze move through the mint and thyme growing in the planter box I built with my own 2 hands. This is how it feels, I've learned, the moment after the storm clears. It's not loud, it's not grand, it's still. Sometimes I walk barefoot on the back patio and let the morning dew kiss my feet. I keep a small notebook by the door. Not a journal, exactly, just a place to write down things I notice. Yesterday, I wrote, "The rosemary bloomed." The day before that, "The silence no longer hurts." I've stopped explaining myself, even to myself. The woman I used to be would have filled this part of the story with apologies for not leaving sooner, for staying too long, for missing signs, for losing herself. But not now. Now I know. Survival is not failure. Endurance is not weakness. Silence is not consent. I've learned that a woman can spend her whole life giving and giving and giving and still be told she didn't do enough. But that doesn't make it true. It just means she gave to the wrong person. A few nights ago, I found myself in the attic, sorting through boxes I hadn't touched in years. I found my old teacher's badge, photos from field trips, little thank you notes from students with crooked handwriting and too many exclamation marks. I held one close to my chest, a card from a boy named Ezra. It said, "Thank you for making me feel seen." And I realized that's all I ever wanted, to be seen, not as useful, not as dutiful, just as me. Elira, not Corbin's wife, not the woman behind the man, not the one who keeps the house running, just Elira, the woman who listens more than she speaks, who grows her own herbs, who wears pearl earrings to the library even when no one is looking. The final chapter of this story didn't come with revenge or applause. It came with peace. Corbin never apologized, not directly. I didn't expect him to. People like him think silence is strength, even at the end. But I don't need his apology to close this door, because I've already opened a new one. Neria calls more now, sometimes just to talk, sometimes to ask about recipes. Last week she said, "You sound lighter." And she's right. I am. Not because everything worked out perfectly, but because I stopped trying to carry what wasn't mine. I no longer carry his disappointments, or the weight of saving a marriage I didn't break, or the ache of being unloved by someone I gave everything to. I carry other things now. Fresh groceries in one bag, a poetry book in the other, a little kindness for myself, tucked into the pockets of each day. Sometimes I sit on the front porch as the sun sets, and I imagine the version of me from 10 years ago. The tired woman in the grocery store aisle, the one who cried holding a bag of frozen peas. She wouldn't recognize this woman today, but I think she'd be proud of her. She'd whisper, "You made it." And I'd whisper back, "We made it." This isn't a story of heartbreak. It's a story of return. A return to stillness, to dignity, to self. Because the most powerful thing I ever did wasn't handing Corbin those papers. It wasn't leaving the marriage. It wasn't even starting over. It was the quiet decision I made to stop waiting for someone to choose me, and to finally choose myself. And if anyone asks me now, do you ever regret it? I smile just a little and say, no. I just regret how long I waited to begin. If you've ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, or walked away to find yourself again, tell me your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true, powerful moments like this one. And remember, sometimes choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival.